So, welcome to These Lads Are Mental, guys. Our latest guest is Tom Cronin. How are you, Tom?
I'm very well, thanks. Great to have you here.
This was kind of an interesting one looking back on your past because it definitely came across as like kind of conflicting stories because you were this finance broker, right? But
Yeah,
if you fast forward to today, I mean, what do you even call yourself? Meditation, breath work, is a coach? Like, what do you call yourself nowadays?
usually just Tom. Uh, but I do have a few different things that I do. So I do speaking, I do teach meditation, I run retreats, and I do coach people. So a bit of a mixed bag. And that's something that I work with a lot of my clients to help them sort of get that diversity in their offerings to the world. So yeah, I like to keep that diversity and mix it up a bit.
Would
Where
you,
do you do your retreats?
We do them all around the world. We just did one last week. We had 30 people up at Kingscliff, north of Byron. And
Lovely.
then we've done them in Maui, over in Hawaii. We've done them in Greece. We do them in Bali. We've got one coming up in Bali in September. So I
Okay.
like to sort of mix it up and bring people to exotic locations, hang out with cool people, and eat yummy food.
What does it? So what does a retreat consist of?
We have the foundation of the retreat is a combination of these four limbs. They're basically extracted from Patanjali Sutras. We start with some yoga asana for about 20 minutes. Then we do some pranayama, which is alternate breathing between the nostrils. Then we go into the Vedic meditation or transcendental meditation. And then we lie down in Shavasana. We'll do that multiple times over through the day. And then in amongst that, there's workshops, there's talks, there's quite a few diverse sort of activities that really help them. Really, what we're looking to do is upgrade them on their hardware, which is their physiology, and also on their software, which is their mind. And when we
Yep.
work together on those two components, we get a really powerful transformation over 4 to 6 days.
Brilliant. Sounds like a good recharge. Something I'm always interested in these wellness retreats is, do people still have like, the mobile phones and laptops and stuff, and are they doing work?
No, we have a fairly, I guess, a strict protocol. Our retreats aren't a walk in the park. They're pretty intense. They're really sort of deep immersion. And look, this is not for all retreats and not for all people, but certainly the ones that we run. My goal is to actually have a phenomenal shift in that person from the time they start to the time they finish. And we're talking really a quite a significant change in the way they see the world and the way they feel. And to do that, we need to get them into a de-excited state, which means really removing any form of stimulation. So we do recommend that they don't have any access to their phones, computers. Maybe it's just a quick call for the kids or something like that, maybe once a day for 5 minutes. But most of the time, they're really in that incubator of the deep immersion on the retreat. And what that does is that it really helps them de-excite their mind and their nervous system, their biochemistry, their physiology, which is really what we need to do to get to that high vibrational state of peace. So that's a big theme in our retreats, is getting people into a state of peace.
Yeah, bang on. I would expect that. Obviously, if I was going to go to a retreat, I would be like, right, well, I'm doing this 100% because as soon as you're down the rabbit hole of touching something else, and it sort of defeats the purpose. I was watching. I don't know if you've watched White Lotus, the TV series, but I was watching White Lotus in
Mm.
the racing season. They go to, I think they're in Thailand, and that's what they do. They make sure everyone has their phone in a sort of locked bag. And I always thought that's actually pretty good to be forced to do that because I know Bistecca in the city do that when you go for dinner in Sydney
mm.
City. They make you put your phone in a locker, and then you have to go and eat your dinner without your phone, which seems like
Wow.
a thing in the past.
Yeah, yeah, it's wild, isn't it? It's
Uh,
actually a good thing to do. I think, we're all really needing major dopamine detoxes. These are such important things to go through where that constant craving for, because really it's the phone's not the problem, it's that state of lack and that state of craving of dopamine, whether it's caffeine, whether it's sugar, whether it's Netflix, Spotify, our phones. We're just really looking for that constant high, and that's part of the problem in the world now.
And do you mind me asking, Tom, so what type of people are coming to you? Like, is it, in my mind, I'm guessing C-suite, high achievers, but is it a real mix? And then what are the reasons why they're coming for you? Is it relationship problems? Is it stress, anxiety, overload, burnout? What kind of symptoms are people coming to your retreats with?
Yeah, we have sort of, I guess, two main areas that people come to me. One is to learn Vedic meditation, which is my weekend courses. So before the retreat, I was at Sunshine Coast running a course for 10 people, teaching them actually how to meditate. And then we've got the retreats, which is like a much deeper, more in sort of immersive experience. But it's really diverse. It's quite phenomenal. Both the retreats and the courses I go, our audience is anything from 16, 17, 18-year olds all the way through to retirees. We have very poor people that are really struggling, and there's always ways for them to be able to access these programs. And then we have very, very high net worth individuals. We had a gentleman on their retreat that was worth $40 million. We've had people worth $300 million come along to our experiences. And I think it all comes down to one thing, regardless of where you live, who you are, what you do for a career, how much money you have. We're all looking for the one thing. We're all looking for fulfillment. We're all looking for stability. We're all looking for peace. We're all looking for a sense of purpose and elevation. So it's just that different people have different paths. And one thing I find that is a sort of equalizer or sort of puts everyone on the same playing field is that once we get into the meditation process, once we get into deep stillness, all the story and all the wealth and all the circumstances just drop away. And peace is actually the absence of all of that noise. And so everyone has that capacity to experience deep peace. And it's the same for everyone. Peace is not different from person to person.
Yeah, it's interesting because I noticed that when I was on the ABC Space 22 show, when it came to things like trauma, where you think your thing is, how severe as it might be. But then when I was there with 700 other participants, and some of the stories I hear from them were just terrible to hear. One guy whose father used to beat up his mum and shot his dog in front of his face to teach him a lesson. And you're thinking, whoa, okay, his issues are a lot more concerning than mine. But by the end of it, I realized that that's not necessarily true either, because it's all relative to you, right? Whatever your thing is, you hold it or you give it the same water as the next person, even though on paper it might seem as severe. So I love that. I love the fact that you are accessible and you can kind of be available for people no matter what your situation is, because it's really just the thing doesn't really matter, right? It's what it means to you is probably more important, right?
I'd go even deeper than that. And one thing that's really missing across the human experience for most people still to this day, after 5,000 to 6,000 years of knowing that exists, is that beyond our thoughts, our feelings, and our physicality lies a realm. In Sanskrit, this is called Turiya. Turiya means the fourth. It's the fourth state, beyond your thoughts, feelings, physicality, beyond deep sleep, beyond dream state. And when we get into that state of knowing that there's an experience of existing without thoughts or feelings, even without the identification with the body, we start to realize that we are being itself. That is a human, that is being. And it's like, the analogy I like to use is that most people think they're the cloud. And the thing with a cloud is that it constantly changes. It has this sort of finiteness about it, has a structure and a boundary to it. And there's a clear sense of identity with the cloud. But what we've got to realize is that we're actually not the cloud, we're the sky. And we're the sky being a cloud in the sky. And so that's like, we're a body, we're a thought, we're a feeling, but we're a thought, feeling, and body whilst we're being, which is spirit. So we have physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual or spirit, the unbounded, the infinite, the eternal, and being itself is non-changing, and it's the same for everyone. So you can have very different clouds, but the sky itself is always the same. And so people have to start to connect with that part of ourselves that is consistent and non-changing, the permanence of being.
Would you say that spiritual is probably the one that's most untapped? Because, when you think about things like the Atma, or, you were talking about feelings and thoughts, and like when you start doing work on yourself in this space, you start to realize, okay, now I can compartmentalize my feelings and thoughts, which is, a good thing. And when you start getting to a meditative state, but then, you start going, well, if I'm watching myself, who's watching me watching myself? And it's this constant one-upment of like, okay, is this me or is this actually just a thought? And I found that quite difficult in my journey of how to distinguish who's watching who, and is that a never-ending prophecy kind of thing? But a big thing from my personal mental health was to be able to realize that anxiety and those things are not your thoughts. It's just a part of you that you can separate and go, okay, that's you having a little moment, but that doesn't define who you are. I mean, is it difficult to navigate that? Like, I'm thinking of regulation, even though it's probably lack of a better term there, but is that the hard part when it comes to the spiritualist of how do you regulate your journey as you go along it? And it can be a bit, I don't know if dangerous is the right word, but it's easy to kind of go away and then become overwhelmed with everything.
Yeah, one thing that's really important that we offer as teachers in the Vedic tradition, and this has been the tradition for 5,000 years, is that the teacher will give ongoing support and assistance to that student, knowing that when they either start their journey on a retreat or start their journey as a meditation student, that's not the end of their journey, that's the beginning. And that they need a very solid and consistent support base to go through that awakening and realizing that they're not their thoughts and they're not their feelings, but that. So for me, my students have ongoing weekly access to me through weekly group calls and group meditations. So that's the first step. But the teaching itself isn't one where there's this upmanship that you were talking about. It's really just two things, which is consciousness itself, witnessing thoughts and feelings. And so really all it is just starting to realize that you are consciousness itself and you have thoughts and feelings. And then you from consciousness just watches the thoughts and feelings. And of course, you'll still have thoughts and feelings, but you have the ability to be more discerning and selective with those thoughts and feelings as you progress through life. And eventually, potentially, some people get all the way to enlightenment where they really identify more with the consciousness itself or being or presence. And it's just presence ultimately in this moment. And so someone like Eckhart Tolle or Adyashanti or Muji would be in these states where there's just such a beautiful state of presence and not being, I guess, disturbed or ruffled by any circumstances in life.
Because isn't that what they talk about as well with religion, with some of those philosophers, in the sense of like we look for this higher state of consciousness, which is, you know, used across religion. There's a God and stuff, but really just it's our own selves. It's our own selves going to a more higher level and like an enlightenment. Would you agree with that kind of sentiment that like sometimes we look for a God in something, but it's actually ourselves. We hold the answers right in our own body.
Well, if we explore the nature of if someone wanted to use the word God, and I've had this discussion with religious people many times over, and this is not to disparage any religions. Religions play such an integral role as in my mind, a beautiful stage of appreciating and understanding that there is something beyond the world of form and phenomenon, the physical wall behind you, the physical body that we're in, that there's a sense that maybe there is something more pervasive, more celestial, more ethereal, more profound and more powerful than this physical world of science and thoughts and feelings and physicality. And then the next stage is to go into the understanding of what is that thing that we're talking to or praying to. And when we explore God as an omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient force, then omnipotent means all powerful, omniscient means all knowing, and omnipresent means all things. So if it's omnipresent, then it must be a pervasive intelligence that you are part of, because it can't exclude you. If it's omnipresent, it means all things, and it pervades and exists within the form of all things as formlessness. And so it's a very esoteric conversation we could have here, but maybe a little bit early for some people who are listening to this while they're having their breakfast.
On Good Friday as well, excuse the
Yeah,
pun.
yeah, exactly. But it's the big awakening is exactly like you said, the realization that you are that field of infinite love, infinite wisdom, and infinite intelligence, and to slowly over time to melt and dissolve and free yourself of the ignorance and start to embrace the knowledge and the truth of that.
Just to quickly move along from that, because we've obviously got you've got so much to go through. One thing that caught my eye was the mission for inspiring 1 billion people. Now, this caught my eye as well because I don't know if you've heard of Mo Goddard, who is, she's both nodding her head. So he's someone I really enjoy listening to for multiple different reasons. But he had the mission of 1 million happy. It started off as 1 million happy, then I think similar to yourself, it's now 1 billion happy. Did you start with a smaller mission and then realised this has got legs and had a much bigger mission after that?
Yeah, I was working with some marketing agencies of all things when I left finance to start the Stillness project, which was kind of like this sort of big umbrella program that I was creating. And the Stillness project, they wanted a tagline for it for marketing reasons. And the tagline, I said, what's the purpose of this? I said, I don't know, inspire 1 million people to meditate daily. And they said, but you could reach that in 10 years. I mean, then what are you going to do? And I went, I don't know. And so they said, I think you need to have 1 billion to give it a bigger vision,
Yeah.
but also bigger impact, but also keep me occupied for a little bit longer. So,
But it does it from a marketing perspective. I think 1 million is the sort of common go-to language for like, oh, 1 million, just it's a number that you might hit, you might not hit, but it's achievable. But if you don't hit it, it's like, oh, it was a big number anyway. But
It
1
sounds like
billion
Austin
sounds like
Powers, $1 million.
1 billion's like, oh, he's serious about this. This is like, this must be massive. This is a proper mission because 1 billion definitely captures your attention considering the percentage on the rest of the world. So I think from a marketing perspective, it definitely works. It definitely catches your eye straight away. You go, does that say billion? Like, massive, massive. And to that point, as you're going through the bit at the start there, it is interesting that side of health. I'm heavily involved in the physical side of health for my career. And like, very interested in the mindset side of things, the spiritual side. My wife is religious. A lot of football players that I work with are deep into the psychological side of things, and a lot of them do meditation and stuff. But I've never personally can say that I've had that experience that you spoke about, that peacefulness, that bliss. From my whole life's been involved in health, fitness, performance, sport performance, elite performance. I think I've ever had that experience. So when you have these retreats or you have your classes, do you ever get people come in and think, I've never experienced this? Or is it someone who's always had some sort of experience with it?
no, very often it's someone that's never had that experience. I was working with one of the top companies in the world the other day. I worked with Amazon, Oracle, Boston Consulting Group, and we have people that are very, very high achievers, sports stars, CEOs, etc. And everyone has access to that state, and everyone will get access to that state through the program, even if it's just temporary glimpses. But if we think of the concept enlightenment, we know this exists, and we know definitively that people have had this experience over thousands of years, written about it, talked about it. It's definitive that this is a human possibility. And the only difference between enlightened people and non-enlightened people is one thing. And if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, which
Yep.
talks about the 10,000 hour principle, the only difference is that they just allocated more of their time to it. We've just allocated a lot of time to working, a lot of time to scrolling, a lot of time to shopping, a lot of time to drinking, a lot of time to gambling, a lot of time to making babies. So it's just a time allocation and a series of preferences. And if someone makes that their preference, then they'll achieve that goal.
So
It's
on
just
that
that they
point
know.
then, sorry to interrupt, just on that point from a practical standpoint, like me, I think listening to this, I'm genuinely interested in, I've just had a baby, got a business, all that stuff goes on. The chaos of life can quickly take over. I'm sure a lot of people listening are in the same boat. So 10,000 hours obviously comes with time and consistency, but how long do you think it takes to get that glimpse of doing something? Obviously, consistency is the key thing here. Obviously, doing it once a month versus doing it daily, but in smaller chunks is probably more beneficial. But what have you seen as like the time frame to like stick with it for at least, and then you'll get a glimpse?
We definitely notice people experiencing within the first few days of
Oh,
a
okay.
shift of, oh, okay, wow, okay, I didn't know that was there. I'm starting to experience something in a calmness, a peacefulness, a non-reactiveness. There's some part of me that is not entangled emotionally into the machinations of the world. And they can notice that within days and weeks. But the ongoing consistency and stability of putting their daily meditation into place. And the big thing I'd come back to with why are you working, why are you having babies, why are you getting married? And the answer will always be the same. I'm looking to reach fulfillment. That's why we do every single action, every single person on the planet, whether going into a sauna, an ice bath, doing crack cocaine, buying a book, going to the gym, eating ice cream, making love. Everyone's doing the same thing. They're trying to find fulfillment. The big question is, how's that working out for us? And what we've got to do is look at some of the deepest, most fulfilled people on the planet, enlightened people. What have they done that has enabled them to get to that state where this fulfillment is a lasting, sustainable state of bliss and joy that doesn't get eroded by any circumstances of life? And one thing we've found is that they've consistently put time aside for stillness and meditation, every single one of them. And all we've got to do is not necessarily walk away from the world like a Buddhist monk and shave your hair and put on some robes, but just have a more balanced proportion of your day from action to inaction. And when we say inaction, it sounds a bit, devoid of anything, but what we're talking about is going into meditation.
And from a meditative point of view, if you fast forward to today, I find when I meditate, it gives me room to think. And I've read about this as well, about we don't have enough time in our conscious minds to actually like decompress some of the information that we get. And the information that we receive nowadays versus 50 years ago is like, you know, grown exponentially, but we don't actually have the same time to sit back and digest it all. One thing I noticed with meditation is it does give you that space to actually let go of all those things and kind of have deeper thinking. And it seems funny, but whenever I meditate, in one way, I feel like I need a notepad and a pen beside me, because when you remove all those external factors, the stimulations, as you mentioned, even Marcus Aurelius talks about all those thousands of years ago, you start thinking a lot clearer and a lot simpler. And just one thing might pop into your head, like it might be like mend that relationship with Gary, and it just comes into your head. So do you think like in modern society that like is that one of the key things that meditation does do? Provide space for us to actually decompress and think a bit clearer?
Yeah, there's two quotes come to mind. One is one from the late David Lynch, who said, ideas are like fish. To get the bigger ones, we need to go deeper. And this is something in reference to transcendental meditation. To transcend means to go beyond the thinking mind and into that deep field of conscious awareness, which is where infinite creative possibility lies. So it's a really important state for us to get into. But more importantly is another quote from Oprah Winfrey, who also does this meditation of transcendence. She says, it is only from that space can you create your best work and your best life. And your best work and best life is a life that's creative, a life that has lots of ideas, a life that has space in it for, like you said, you know. So I think it's such an important part of our day to expand our mind beyond the recurring limited thoughts that we have on a daily basis and get it into a much broader, expansive state of mind.
Yeah, so something I've tried to do the stereotypical meditate of just sitting there, eyes closed and blah, blah, blah. My head goes a million miles per hour. I'm like, oh, it's not working. Even though it is working, you know, it's one of those ones. And then, so I thought, you know what, this was only like maybe a month ago. I thought, I need to do something. My head's going a million miles per hour. So I decided to take I walk anyway, a lot, but almost raw dogging a walk with no earphones, no mobile phone, just going for the walk. And the difference it's made, started off with just like one in the morning and then one after work. And then I started doing one every like 90 minutes to 2 hours, just round the block, just even like 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And similar to Neil's point of, I actually started to feel like I needed a notepad and pen because a lot of the things I just went through were coming to my mind. And like you said a second ago, Tom, about you need that time to have ideas and create and think. I started to realise as the months went on, like I'd given myself no time to be creative and to think and have that imagination, and probably maybe the best way to explain it of having all the ideas and information. I did have to have those connections and realised, oh, that actually connects with that, and it made that much more simpler. And why was I even thinking about that? By literally walking around the block for 10 minutes. And that was probably, I suppose that's a small glimpse from my side, being like, oh my God, it's almost like I missed it from 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Like, I used to have this sort of time as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
just constantly going wild. And it's a hard battle though. So from everything you say is amazing. I love it. I love the thought of it and having that practice in my life and practicing it. But I think the biggest obstacle for anyone listening, including myself and probably Neil, and maybe even you, Tom, as well, is trying to, it's a constant tug of war with all the other things in life. And I think if you look at everything in life, you're a little bit different because it's your career and you're the expert in this area. But if there's something you go, I've got all this stuff to do, I need to carve out this much time for meditation. I'll do it later because I need to deal with this business call. I need to go and do this. I need to do that. I need to get the dinners ready. I need to do that. So I think my head's just going to the practical element for people. Like, I think if you can get deep enough and you can go to that quote, getting deep enough in yourself and go, I'm going to commit to this, then you can probably carve out the time, 7 o'clock till 7:30, this is my time. But for the chaos of life, for that, say someone working in Sydney City, office job, kids, madness of life, where's the first place you'd say to them, right, start here? Just start here first. Like I've said, I went a walk. Like for me, that's what for now. Where I go after that, I don't know, but that's where I'm at just now. What do you recommend?
I think the first thing we need to do is look at compartmentalizing our day and working out really the areas that we need to allocate on a daily basis to our day. So there are some key factors that I like to take my clients through when we started breaking down the chunks of a day. We need to have family and friendship times. That's community time, family and friends. We need to have personal preservation and development. So that would include sleep, for me, meditation, possibly reading, journaling, ice baths, saunas, so things that are going to actually help me physiologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually improve myself. So these are things that we must do on a daily basis. We need to have some form of entertainment. And some of these are going to cross over. So you can do like your family, friendship, relationship time whilst you're doing the saunas and ice baths, right? So we're covering sort of a bit of an overlap here in the pie chart. We might have entertainment. So for me, that could be reading, it could be Netflix, YouTube, but every day I like to have at least 1 to 2 hours of just fun entertainment.
Yep.
And that is again crossing over, with my family or my wife, sitting and watching some TV after dinner. Then we're going to need some spiritual time, which can come into the personal development time. Then we've got work time and career time. So we need to make sure we've got all of those pieces of pie in the pie chart covered for a very balanced and happy and fulfilled life. And what we tend to find is a lot of people having really big chunks of one piece of pie and really tiny, small or no room for other chunks of pie. But really what we want to do is we want to live a vibrant, joyful, healthy, happy life. And we need to have a really balanced pie chart when it comes to the way we're structuring our day. And so what I recommend to my clients is that we actually put a timetable into their day. And
I was going to jump in there and say that I feel like even personally, my life is getting to that point where you want to think that you can just live life, not on the fly, but come as you go. And I'm just finding more increasingly, especially in the last year or two, it's just not, I can't live like that, which seems strange to compartmentalize your whole life into blocks, but it's just the reality. I mean, is that the same for everyone? I mean, Gary and I are both business owners, we're kind of busy. Is that only for that type of person? Or do you think for all people, no matter what your background is, that we are moving toward this very sectioned off, segregated style of living? Because if I don't have those systems in place personally, I can't deal with life. And then all those things you mentioned, while I might have a good run of them, if I fall out of my little routine, then I start getting on top of myself. You haven't worked out for 3 days. Then you feel sorry for yourself. I'm tired. I've managed a kid. I should have a croissant. I should watch that movie. Then it rolls into Monday again, and you can snowball quite. Like, do you think living in that structured way is just going to be par for the course going forward for everyone?
I don't think it's going to be something that everyone would be inspired to do. I think it's those people that are usually sort of that type of, in the human design, we call them manifesting generators or generators that are sort of quite driven. Yeah, right. So usually sort of entrepreneurs, successful people, because there's a tendency to highly prioritize their success and their businesses, that will come usually at a cost to a lot of other areas, which will usually be family and connection, and then obviously their well-being. And then that leads us, so this is what we call in the three gunas, a very Rajasic type lifestyle where they're just constantly driven. So New York, Sydney, those big cities where there's high achievers and really go, go, go. But that leads to a tamasic existence, which is where they're burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they just can't cope. I had a business owner just the other day, was actually I couldn't get hold of them for a while. I noticed they weren't posting. I reached out and said, hey, what's going on? I'm quite concerned for you. And they've been in hospital for a month because of burnout. And that's simply because they were Rajasic. And being too Rajasic, too driven, leads to tamasic, which means incapable. And that's what happened to me as a broker, where I became incapacitated as well. What we want is sattvic. So sattvic is where we're really balanced and we're coming from a state of flow. And if you naturally are in that state of flow where you prioritize your well-being over other things, then you can work with that. But for most people, what I tend to find, particularly in our Western world now, we do need to, what I call time boxing. And you can just go to Amazon and buy some time box notepads and time box your day. We have a success planner that all of my coaching clients get delivered to their front door, which is a daily journal, which is all about time boxing their day and getting clear every day on their visions and goals. And at the end of the day, they have to do some tick boxes and acknowledge that they did tick off those 8 targets for that day. So it's very structured and formulate.
I started using an app called Tick last year. The same thing. It just was without time boxing, my day just went chaotic. But to one question I had as you were talking about that is, it's funny. One, because you're talking about the people who say the high achievers and the driven people and the type A personalities, ambitious, etc. It's like they're so driven, they want to accomplish something, and there's there's definitely merit to that because they can accomplish so much and make good impact if that's what they're trying to achieve. But then at the same side, they can't really be as effective unless they're getting that other side of it. And obviously, a lot of the employers that they might have, if they're self-employed, don't often support that sort of side of it, which is a bit mental. I know sometimes might pay lip service to it, but it might not actually put it in practice. I think that's one point that blows my mind. I think that's a different discussion, and obviously you're doing work in that space. But the other point was that I think in modern day, the danger is probably the wrong word, but what you often see, especially in social media, is I think sometimes people go to the other end of the spectrum where their life becomes nothing but wellness, health and wellness.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, it sounds so bad, it sounds like a crazy phrase, but it's health and wellness porn. It's just like that's their mind constantly. But to your point of like, you want that life of fulfillment and balance, and there's still merit in the working hard and in being ambitious and entrepreneurial. If that's who you are as a person. But I've got some mates who their whole day is wellness.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, what? You're super well, but what you betting? What you been well for? Like, what's the plan? Or do you
Well,
come across people like
most
that as
people
well?
that
Just
do
obsessed
that,
with it.
yeah, I talk about that a lot with Nimbus, that there's this toxicity to wellness of like always on and doing that, and then you can be addicted in the to good things as well that can have a negative effect, because a lot of people who are that way inclined, as Gary was saying, are actually miserable. It's like, so it's that 80-20 rule of like, you have to still live life. Like if you focus too much on one thing, whether it's good or bad, it can have a negative effect on you, right?
Yeah, I love the quote, chop wood, meditate, chop wood.
Say
So
that again.
having chop wood, meditate, chop wood.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so having that
Very
activity,
good.
the point of the wellness, whatever your practice is or practices, is so that the activity is good. And the activity in the Vedic tradition we see as an integral part of the integration and application of the time out for your wellness so that you can perform better, achieve better, and apply that in a way that it gets utilized in a really good way.
And if you just thinking of your own career, and like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to our show who struggle with things like anxiety and burnout, as you mentioned. Was there an aha moment, or do you have any tips for someone who's listened to go, okay, here are some red flags that you really need to start investing in your wellness? Like, and maybe case in point with yourself, you were a broker. Was there a moment where you were like, shit, I need to do something here?
Yeah, my moment was a moment you don't want people to get to. My moment was complete nervous breakdown, and that was diagnosed by psychiatrists, psychologists, and doctors. I was put on medication. I was in suicide ideation. I was experiencing extreme panic attacks, depression, insomnia, agoraphobia. Couldn't even go to work. Couldn't leave the house. So that was a really deep, dark spiral out of control as a result of really bad lifestyle choices and a really intense career, and not having any at all application or time allocation to my mental, physical, emotional well-being. So the catalyst was obviously a major critical moment in my life for change, and that's where I came across meditation. But for the listeners, I would suggest a couple of things to check in. Do you have restless leg, tapping leg syndrome? So while you're sitting on the train or while you're watching TV, are you constantly tapping your leg? That's one. Too much cortisol, adrenaline in your system, looking for somewhere to go and it doesn't have an outlet. Are you addicted to caffeine? Do you need coffee on a daily basis? Another signal that could be a problem. Do you find it hard to fall asleep at night? Another problem. Do you find it easy to fall asleep but then wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and can't go back to sleep? Too much cortisol or overthinking in the mind. Are you finding that you don't have any energy or motivation to basically go to the gym or do something physical while being you just energy levels, normally adrenal fatigue, those sorts of things? Are you irritable, cranky, and responding negatively very easily to certain circumstances of life? So these are sort of things people can check in and see if they're answering yes to those.
That's good. That's a good practical checklist. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Awesome.
there's a lot of people sitting there nodding their head, going, "Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
I
yep."
was thinking, tick, tick, tick.
So I'm keen on looking at. There's actually one question here that I'm not super familiar with because is the portal. So you've brought us a unique concept, Neil. Could you talk more about that, Tom?
Yeah, sure. So I watched the film The Secret, which was a phenomenal film that really was one of the first documentaries that brought something quite esoteric to the world. And what they brought to the world was this idea of the law of attraction, a global phenomenon across the world. Every country heard about it, saw it, read it in a book or the film. It was a $300 million success. But what I felt was missing was the how. They didn't really touch on the technique of how to be better at laws of manifestation and magnetism and attraction. So I wanted to follow in that with a film that really showcased the power of meditation. And this was back in 2010, 2011, 2012, when we didn't have the Calm app, we didn't have Nimbus, we didn't have, meditation and health and well-being as a big part of our community at that point in time. So we raised some capital with investors and we made a film, produced a book off the back of the film. We had a website and some apps and online programs. And the point of that was to showcase the power of meditation to move us through crisis and crises on an individual and collective level. So that film is now out there in the world, and yeah, it's been a big project.
And how does that link into your stillness project as well? Because we've talked about how busy we are, tapping legs, things like that. Are the two of them interconnected? And like, how does anyone who's listening, how do we truly become still?
I guess there's two questions there. The first one is, how does it interconnect with the Stillness Project? Because the Stillness Project was to inspire 1 billion people to meditate daily. And the film very much inspires people that one of not the only, but one of the key solutions to moving us out of trauma, out of crises, out of pain and suffering, and really most of the problems of the world come from a state of consciousness, is to shift us out of that through the practice of meditation. Now, I believe there are many other practices and things that we can do, but I find for me the one I wanted to cover and touch on was meditation. And can stillness be something that anyone can experience? Stillness is at the foundation of every human. And just the analogy I like to use here is, if we take the ocean, on the surface, it might be wild waves with peaks and troughs and undulations, which are these ripples being caused by its interaction with other things, wind, high low pressure systems, the moon, boats moving along it. These are leaving an impression on the ocean that leaves these peaks and troughs, which is what humans experience when we get impressed upon by circumstances. And like you were saying, you had a number of different circumstances happening before we got on this podcast, Neil, in your life, which can make us feel ruffled and disturbed. But at the depths of the ocean, there's stillness, and it's not moving, it's not changed, it's not influenced or affected. And we all have that at the deeper level of our own existence, but it's not where most people are interested in going at this point in time. And my job is to help them discover that.
It's such you're pretty much, I think this is a topic that in the last few years has gathered a lot more momentum, more awareness, but now even more so, I think, with AI coming in, and we actually spoke about AI quite a lot recently, and again, we won't go down the conversation. There's a lot of positives to it, and there's a lot, obviously, but a worry around it as well, because people aren't too sure where it's going to go, etc., etc. But from back to the human side of it, humans aren't going anywhere, so it's how do we navigate that? And we're going to have more information than ever thrown at us. Whether there's going to be doubt in information we consume, whether we use it for good or bad, again, is a different conversation. But I think the topic now of stillness, and going back to probably the most powerful thing in the world of the human brain and their own mindset, and then the most amazing thing in the world of the individuality of each person's brain and how they can create and make impact and help people and create good memories and experiences for people. I think what you're doing just now, there's going to be a huge, huge surge in this. I mean, from a business perspective, you're laughing, but I mean, but I just feel like now more than ever, there's like a huge tipping point coming where if people can take this serious and they can actually carve out time for it, they're going to like, I think, in fact, that's the wrong way of saying it. I think it's an essential now. It's going to become essential. No, I think in the last 10 years, it's been like, oh, this is a cool thing. Bit of health, bit of wellness, on his ice bath, meditation. I'm doing a bit of this. But I think now more than ever, if you don't do this, I think the mental health problem of the anxiety, the stress, etc., could really, really become even worse. So I think it's so, so powerful. At that portal, I was just Googling there. If you see me typing, I was just Googling the movie thing to watch it later. So yeah, my question then for you would be outside of meditation, because for me, that's still quite daunting, meditating, because maybe due to a stigma of what is meditation, you just constantly think sitting there, stillness, legs folded, Buddhist style, like that. I think that is daunting. I think Neil's got a question around that as well, especially in the men's side of things. I think a lot of
you should
Neil's.
find a good meditation teacher. I've got one in mind that you could talk to, but
Okay, beautiful.
yeah, he lives in Bondi. He's a really cool guy. He does podcasts on every now and then.
Is that
Okay.
Marshy? Like I trained with Marshy, Andrew Marsh, but
I'm talking about myself just quietly, but
oh.
it's like,
Quietly, quietly on.
these guys aren't picking up on this yet.
But that's the thing. That's the thing I talk about as well. Even like, I often say this where I go against my own business, and you mentioned Nimbus and saunas, and whilst all those things are great, most of the actual things that mean the most to you are actually usually free. So, was meditation to get a good trainer, obviously you might have to pay for it, but it's with you for life. Same with yoga. Once you learn it, you have it forever, and it's free and accessible. And you can pull it out of your bag, your toolkit, whenever you want, right? But there is a bit of stigma. Well, it's definitely coming down, but if you think about, like, I mean, you working with a lot of men, is it 50-50 with genders? Like, how do we get like a big kind of bravado type guy to let down the walls and go, I actually need some help here? And how do we get people like that into meditation? Because it's only one step maybe, but it's a big step.
Yeah, it's a really good question and an area that I'm really passionate about. The retreat we just had last week in Kingscliff, New South Wales, we had 30 people on that retreat. We had 5 guys. But the really interesting thing, at the end of the retreat, we go around the circle and we get everyone to share, what they're inspired by and how they felt they've shifted as a result of the retreat. And it's always amazing to hear what people say. But 3, 4, 5 times, the women said, I just want to acknowledge the men in this room. And it was really, really powerful. I get a bit emotional thinking about it because everyone was crying. And it was just like the women were really acknowledging the few and far between amount of men that were committing to doing this work, and how important that was for the women to see that. That's what they're looking for, is strong, quiet, powerful, masculine types that are really connected to their self and not in that binary state of fight flight where we either get aggressive and try and deal with our challenges, and that can be on a global level where we go to war, or we punch someone in the face, or we scream louder in a meeting, or we run away and we just go to the pub and get wasted, or we slam the door and walk out of the room, or we quit our job, or for some guys 6-to-1 men to women commit suicide. And that's again just that binary choice of, I'm going to be more aggressive or I'm going to run out of this. And so what we need is men to not be in that binary state, but to actually to be more connected to their well-being, connected to their spirit, and connected to their hearts.
And how are men coming into this fear, right? Is it them individually? Is there an aha moment like similar to what you had? Is it their partners promoting them to do it? Is it they've done something really wrong? Is there a common thread? And do you have any kind of like no bullshit advice about how men can get past that barrier to entry?
Quite often they're dragged by the ear by the wives. You're coming with me.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay.
Because it does manifest, like, if you don't, like, for any men listening, this is very throwaway advice, so take it with a pinch of salt, but if you don't tackle these things, my theory is that what happens then, it manifests in things like alcohol, you mentioned, drugs, adultery, bad parents, not connected with your children, right? Are those the kind of things that might happen if you don't prioritize this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of the male psyche, is to try and work it all out themselves and not be a pussy and not be weak and not to have to ask for help. It's a really challenging thing for men. So, there's no right or wrong way for men to get into things like this. It's really for people like yourself, just bringing more awareness to it, taking the woo-woo out of it. For me, is a big part of it. Making it really accessible, really science-based. Just a little story. I had a gentleman who was recommended to me by his mate who had come into contact with me. And this man had sold his business for $350 million. And he could never spend all of his money. He had so much money. He was quite young, had a wife and a few kids, 2 or 3 kids. And he bought a $50 million palatial mansion on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, filled it with 5 luxury cars, had butlers, maids, chefs. He was living the dream as far as there's no more boxes to tick. He had the wife, the kids, the money. Everything was what you'd imagine to be perfect. But his mate told him to contact me because he was, and he said to me, I've never been so depressed, anxious, and angry in my entire life. And I don't even know why. And that's because he'd ticked all the boxes, but he still didn't find what he was looking for. And that's the thing, we've got to start getting that conversation out to the world. Men, you can work as hard as you like. You can have the best businesses in the world. And I've had many CEOs, many multi-millionaires come to me really disenchanted with where they're at in life, and not on a successful level, not on a money level, not on a business level, on an individual personal level. And that's something that is just a reminder we've got to go within and find that within inside ourselves first.
It's quite interesting though that Neil, as you're talking about, a lot of men have got that like, oh, I don't want to be a pussy, I don't want to get involved in that. But if you think of like a lot of men, not to tell them all with one brush, but most men like sports. And if you look at all the top athletes in the world, they all do some form
Yeah.
of meditation. You're talking like boxing, UFC, some brutal sports, like especially UFC because of the Asian influence of all the martial arts, etc. They have it in their practice, and some of the toughest guys in the world. And
Yeah.
it is interesting that you're thinking, oh, I'm big burly men, I'm not getting involved in that. But then if you're looking at some of the best fighters on the planet, the
Yeah.
biggest men, they're doing it all the time because they know to be the best at what they're doing, regardless if it's athletics or whatever it might be, or business, it's essential. And again, I'm talking from the other side. I'm not doing it because I'm not daunted by it. I just don't know where to start, how to do it properly. Probably need a teacher,
Like I said, I'm
etc.
not a teacher.
Yeah. Do you have any
Just
advice for anyone that does say, Tom, okay, meditation, yeah, I get it. I understand its importance, but I just don't have the time. What's your answers to something like that?
Yeah, I just come back to that time allocation. Really, we've got to think about what do we want out of life? And what we want is health, vitality, joy, happiness. These things are going to then result in you having better career, better relationships, better, many aspects of life will be better as a result of the state that you're in. And one of the things that I coach my clients is what's more important than what you're doing is what state you're in while you're doing what you're doing. Because our state, now we're starting to understand the laws of attraction and magnetism, is that it's your state that's going to call in a lot of the things that you're looking to call in. Rather than you having to hustle and work 16-hour days, what if you could actually optimize your state, work on a vibrational level, and under the laws of attraction start to attract into your life the things that you're looking for, because you've already reached the state of fulfillment regardless of the outcome. And so giving them the understanding about the science behind that.
Can I ask you a question about calling, right? I've done Vedic meditation, so I've trained, and there's a lot of the teaching there is like, go to what's calling you. Now, my wife and I definitely butt heads on this note around where do you see the answer in terms of, because if you think if you're an entrepreneur, right, you get hit with all these challenges and it's about overcoming these challenges. But then when is there too many challenges versus listening to the universe and going with your flow? Because quite often it's almost like you try and do anything and you hit a wall. So where I struggle to, I suppose, understand is where is my radar? Is this like, no, it's just tough. Life is tough. You got to get on with it. But if you push through, you will succeed. Versus, okay, you're trying this thing. It's constantly pushing back. Is it time to let go? And that's the bit I struggle with a lot. I'm sure many people as well. It's like, and maybe there is no answer to this, but how do you know whether you need to push through this or you need to let go?
That's a really good question, and it's a great topic, particularly in business. When do you decide that this is enough and it's time to pull a pin, or are we just at the edge of when you're digging for gold and you're like literally a centimeter away and you give up when you could have just pushed on a little bit further and all of a sudden it happens? I don't think there's a black and white answer for that, and I think that I've been in a failed business and we pushed on for 10 years with investors, and it was a really, really challenging time. Financially, I would have been much better off if I pulled the pin 5 years before we decided to. But for me, I had to give it everything that I possibly could before I definitively could make that decision for myself and for the investors as well. I think it's a really difficult thing to come to terms with, is this me not listening intuitively that this is not the path? I always think if it's getting too arduous, if it's getting too challenging, we should be in flow, and life should be really quite an effortless process. And if it's too hard, then it's usually a signal that maybe we're going down the wrong route.
Because part of you is like, why does it need to be this difficult? And then also sometimes people look in and go, oh, you're doing great. And that's what people's view is from the outside. But internally, it just feels like a constant schlep. But then I listen to How I Built This quite a lot, and nearly every successful entrepreneur in that goes through this shit to get out the other end. Even, I don't know if there's any parents listening, but like Paw Patrol, which is a big thing with kids. I listened to that podcast, and that's actually like a toy company that started back in the 80s, and how they were the guys that invented that kind of, you put water on this little potato sack and it grew hair up through the thing. That was their first like hit. And they went through all these waves of like, they'd find a toy, it would create millions for them, but then there'd be a shelf life and then it would fall off. And the guy was talking how they used to have 900 staff and worth X amount of million. And then they nearly went bankrupt until they put out this literally last minute call going, we need a new idea. This guy wrote a show about Paw Patrol. They went on a trip to Japan, which they learned about if you want to have a successful franchise, you basically have to have everything, the show, the movie, and Paw Patrol was the thing. And now they're worth, $10 billion or whatever. And now it's obviously huge. So it's like those guys would have been in that same scenario going like, we're at the end here, but they clawed it out of nowhere, the 11th hour, and now it's back to a multi-billion-dollar company. So it's like...
No, but maybe we have an example. You could give that example, and then sort of another example of some guy who done, like Tom just says, 10 years of grafting, and like, it's just life, and there's going to be both ends of the spectrum. I suppose context is king there, looking at every individual situation and the person involved in it. So I'm just hurrying a wee bit there because I know Tom's short on time, and I just want to get through this last little question. We can probably tie in the last two questions together regarding where he's at in the last quickfire. Do you want to run through the quickfire, and then we can make sure Tom's not late for his next call?
Yeah, so normally, Tom, we fire through these 3 questions at the very end of each episode. So every guest has done this, and we try and keep it short and snappy. So I'll kick off with number 1. Where do you think the world is out of 10 in terms of mental health awareness?
That's such a good question. I would say 5.
5, okay. So a lot of room for improvement. And where are you personally out of 10 in regard to your own mental health right now?
7 to 7.5. Always room for improvement.
Yep. And if you could recommend, I might know the answer to this already, but if you could recommend one thing that people could do each day to improve their own mental health, what would that be?
Meditate and have some saunas and Nimbus.
Well, just very quickly, because we did skip a question, I was curious about it. What, obviously you meditate, but you do anything else when you obviously you're at a 6 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 outside of
Yeah, I have a very holistic approach. So I love saunas. I love ice baths. I go to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week. I go to yoga. I do yoga every day. I do breath work. I do journaling. I eat well, drink lots of healthy water with hydrolytes and things like that, usually from Nimbus. And so, yeah, just it's being optimized as a human being is possible, but it does take a lot of holistic approach to that.
And kind of one small question as well, just to close off around, you've obviously done a lot of inner work, and you're not only doing that with yourself, you're doing that with, millions, hopefully billions of people in the world. I'm sure you still face battles, do you? Like, it doesn't go away, right? Like, do you have any advice on people who are going, well, I tried that, it's not getting better? Like, how, because I think that was a big thing with mental health for me, that you're not trying to solve the problem, it's part of you, right?
Yeah, look, I think mental health is a process just like physical health. That's a daily process. To be believing that your mental health is just a given, it's not. It's just like physical health is not a given. It's something that you have to work at. But life will never stop challenging you. People around you will get sick, people around you will pass, businesses will fail, businesses will succeed. It'll rain on your picnic. Your kid will have something go wrong, he'll break his arm. That's just life. Life is just a constant fluctuation. Sometimes things are good, sometimes things are pretty lousy. And so what we got to be better at is not being so emotionally entangled in all of those situations and so attached to the need for it to work out. And that gives us the capacity to be in the world, to be trusting of the world, and to be less discombobulated by these circumstances, to be more stable and consistent whilst we're in the fluctuations.
I think, Gary, you're definitely better than me at this, because I often think, when you read out some of those things, I think when something goes wrong, I woke up the other day and someone had just driven into our car overnight. And I'm like, fuck's sake, another thing. Then, you have a big day at work and your kid goes to daycare and then he's sick. And you're like, fuck's sake, another thing. And you start going into this spiral. So Gary's brilliant on that, because he's always like, come on, mate, you've got a lovely kid, but that's definitely something I need to work on, just being in that negative mindset too often.
Sorry, Neil, I'm actually very conscious of Tom's time. I know how stressful it can be waiting on our call. Just lastly, where can people find more about you, mate, and how do people reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. Instagram is where I love to communicate with people. So I love getting messages from people, and that's just at Tom Cronin, one word. And then my website's the same, tomcronin.com. So those are the two places ultimately. Obviously there's LinkedIn and Facebook, but my
And where do you
website.
watch the Portal, the movie? Where can people watch that?
They can find it on my website, Tom Cronin, or they can go to entertheportal.com, and they can watch that for free at the moment.
Okay, perfect, mate. Brilliant. Well, look, mate, thanks very much for your time. You're obviously a busy man, and I hope you enjoy the long weekend as well.
Yeah, happy Easter to you both, and thanks for your time today. It's really great connecting in with you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
likewise,
Tom.
mate.
See you, mate. Bye.
All the best, mate. Cheers.
See you
Bye.
guys.